ODHIAMBO RAMOGI is an economist. He's from Elim Capital. He's been here before. We want to talk about the shilling and the depreciation and what it's doing to the economy. You know, nobody noticed this. None of us did until Andrew Franklin has noticed it. When Edna was doing the thing with our social media flyers yesterday, she wrote that ODHIAMBO RAMOGI is coming to talk about how the US dollar shortage will impact Kenya's economy.
Yes. And many thanks to Franklin.
He's noticed. Edna noticed. None of us noticed. Hiya. You're here because we want to talk about what's been happening in the country. We saw the headlines in the papers on Friday, and they were raising the issue of an apparent dollar shortage in the market. Of course, this is a conversation that's been there for a while. We've seen the shilling tank, and it's gone beyond 130, approaching 140 to the dollar. And against other major currencies as well, it's doing the same. Even against the currencies within the East African community, doing still the same. The question is there a shortage of dollars as we saw in the papers?
Yes, there is a shortage of dollars.
And by shortage, what do we mean?
The country is part of the international community with the standard that we should have at least 3 months of supply of dollars sufficient for imports. So that if, for example, we import using around, say, $2 billion in a month, then our dollar reserves should be around $6 billion at the least. In January, that figure had come down to around 3.9 months supply of dollars. And it is evident now that we have passed the threshold of 3 months. I haven't looked at the figures for February yet. Because there is already evidence of this lack or scarcity of the same, with banks unable to provide dollars. They are, in fact, rationing. So if you went to a bank and you said, I want $10,000 for import or for any other purpose that is well recognized in law, they tell you, we do not have 10,000, we are able to give you 5,000. And these are the bigger banks. If you got 10,000, you are a lucky one. So you find then that it is accurate to say that there is a dollar shortage. We've been here before. Last year, you remember that Pwani Oil closed for a while because they could not access dollars to import their inputs. As late as December, there are already some complaints around it. So yes, it is accurate to say that there is dollar shortage.
Is this to actually talk about CBK breaching this dollar importation reserves?
Yes, and I have said...
Has CBK actually confirmed that they have gone below?
They haven't. And that's why, for now, it is sufficient to say the evidence on the ground. Say there is a dollar shortage. The official communication we got as early as January is that we are doing fine. We have 3.9 months. But there is a dollar shortage. The banks are saying they are unable to do their interbank trading that they usually do around dollars because everybody is hoarding the little they have. The clients that go to banks to ask for dollars are saying we are unable to access the amount of money we need to buy things internationally, to bring into the country. And so the evidence is pointing to a dollar shortage. The official communication, however, hasn't come in the affirmative or the negative.
What would be the cause of this?
This would be perhaps from an opinion. And as you have rightly pointed out, it is not the official position of the country. There are several reasons why we are here. One is the fact that we are an importing nation. Generally, we have not put in place mechanisms to export, to produce sufficiently for export. This administration came into power with a promise of two things: agriculture and MSMEs. MSMEs, it was our hope that there will be significant investment in manufacturing, cottage industries, the kind that would sufficiently provide for the local economy and even export to the region. At the same time, agriculture would reduce our reliance on imported food. If you look at the inflation figures for December and January, you'll realize that the highest contribution is the fuel inflation and the food inflation. And fuel is imported. Food is also imported. And so that tells you that the inflation is being fueled by imports and by extension by the foreign exchange rate, which has gotten out of control. And so I think our import regime has made us get where we are. But at the same time, there is also a responsibility in place of the government of the day, because we have opened the doors and we said duty-free imports of sugar, maize, cooking oil, etc., rice. So some people are swimming in money right now, because when you say duty-free imports, they are importing. And when you import, what do you use to import? The dollar.
Yes.
That actually is in shortage right now. So I think that has also significantly contributed. Earlier on, and one of the reasons why perhaps some people were uncomfortable with the Chinese involvement in retail is there were rumors, and this is now rumors, just that the Chinese are very particular about collecting dollars, and that a lot of their investment here, they were taking the dollars back home, and so that contributed because they had made significant investment. But that hasn't been established. If you ask me, I think the major reason, imports.
The spread, the gap between what we are buying the dollar at and what you sell the dollar at. You look at how much the CBK, quotes as the exchange rate versus what the market is actually quoting as exchange rate. There's huge discrepancies in those.
Yeah.
But why would it be so wide? What would lead to that kind of a widespread?
Partly is demand. You see, for example, if there is more demand than there is supply, ordinarily the bank would want to make a kill out of it and say, all right, we are buying at 127 and giving out at 137. And if it's a bit uncomfortable a subject and unfair.
Why? Take another deep breath.
I'm not taking it. Let me put it this way. There is more and more growing literature around capitalism having a heart. Now, that's a long discussion. But yes, you need to have return on investment. Yes, you need to take advantage of opportunities in the market. But banks in this country are making super profits in an economy that is not performing very well. Part of the problem we have around Forex was because of the excitement of banks around it a few years back. And several bank CEOs were caught in the act of just unfair trading around Forex. I think that spread is too big. I think it's a bit unfair. I think it's just capital at work, but at least have a heart in it.
Look, there's also been growing literature on the subject of what we call borrowing. The government simply borrowing from our financial institutions, the literature states, and thereby reducing the possibility of more money being available for circulation within the country, meaning more money, less money being available for business people who would like to borrow, people who would otherwise use that money locally for spurring this story we keep talking about, economic growth.
Absolutely.
There is that literature, okay?
Yes.
Now, the bank understand profit, and lending to the government is safe. You have some guaranteed returns, very, very good percentage. Now, when you talk about that level of borrowing, and we know full well that the bulk of the money that banks have are actually from people. It's not really their own. It's other people's money, as we keep saying.
Yeah.
Now, how do you write this situation? Because we are talking about government efforts. When if we believe that literature, then we would say that the government is sabotaging itself.
So I want to at least separate two things.
Yes.
Foreign exchange rate and the interest rate. The foreign exchange rate and the spread he's talking about alludes to when a bank buys dollars from, say, Ramogi, who was in New York for 2 days, came back with dollars, and he sells it, and the bank sells it to C.T. Muga, who probably wants to travel to New York. And they buy from Ramogi at 127 and sell to Muga at 137. So that spread is what I was saying is a bit unfair. What you are alluding to is on the other end of the whole question of interest rate and crowding out. Now, yes, our interest rates have been a subject of discussion. Again, with the banks charging a bit too expensive, to the extent that the political community is uncomfortable, and the general Kenyan community was uncomfortable with their high interest rates. And so there was the attempt to bring interest rate capping that failed miserably. And the whole circus around it is because government insists on borrowing from banks, as you have correctly alluded to, and thereby now crowding out small, high-risk players like, say, an MSME. Now, is that fair? I think that now is a problem with the government. But you see, borrowing internationally also, they have borrowed from the Chinese, and it has somehow affected our sovereignty in terms of, for example, when they borrowed on the SGR, and then the Chinese can now just come and run your whole SGR, and perhaps even ask for a bath at the port, and they are okay. And now, of course, there is the whole conversation around them doing retail in the country. And so borrowing internationally is okay, but many governments prefer to borrow locally because of the whole question of more borrowing leads to reduced sovereignty. Now, the bigger question, and I'm finishing, the bigger question then is, should the government borrow as much as it has? And that now leads us to the question of deficits and surplus. Yes, you are.
But there's also a link between that borrowing and the repayment period and the exchange rate.
Yes, there is.
Right? Because we are now at the point when the government is actually now needed to pay a lot of the debt. And of course, it pays in those foreign currencies, primarily the dollar. So it is sending out more dollars
than
to repay the debt. We are not importing as much. We are only relying on Kenyans in the diaspora to send us the dollar. And
we are not exporting as much.
Well, yeah, we are not exporting as much. The little coffee and tea and flowers that we are selling. And so that also creates the strain and the stress on the dollar reserves.
Absolutely. 60% of our loan book, especially the international loan book, is in dollars. And so you'd expect that repayment of it would be heavy on the government.
It's in dollars.
Yeah.
You see, let me explain to you where my argument is coming from. Increased economic activity means this thing we keep calling the GDP of the country goes up. All right? It increases. If it increases, it means simply that there is actually more money. So when the government borrows internally or locally, it's in shillings. Now, if the money borrowed is in shillings, because the money we use here is shillings, it means the volatility of our currency against the dollar, which now puts our debt repayment in complete jeopardy. If we borrowed when the dollar was 100 bob per shilling to the shilling, 100 shillings rather to the dollar, and now it's 122, when will we ever really be able to repay this money? Because the interest alone keeps going up. You never even get to the principal.
Yeah.
Especially when the money that has been borrowed is not directly pegged to development. And for development, for me here, I'm talking about when you're buffering your industry, when you're talking about manufacturing. Can we not get to the point where we say, forget about being able to manage things like this when you are not manufacturing, when you are not making profits, when you do not have surplus? Forget about then being able to manage these things the way you talk about. When we look at these countries who are able to do that and negotiate and pay their debt, when they have debts huge in terms of percentages. But if you look at their manufacturing agenda and if you look at their local industries, it's incomparable.
Yep.
So is that not what we're saying now? Until you get to the point whereby you have a surplus mechanism in place, where you have a manufacturing and your industry are actually more than the tea and coffee and flowers that we're talking about. Forget about it. We can be talking about this until the cows come home. Until and unless you're manufacturing, until unless you're making your own and selling and you have a surplus, you cannot be talking about taking loans willy-nilly. Let's talk about something else.
So let me pick it up from there and get to Jerusalem at some point. You are accurate in terms of the preference to borrow locally and the problem we have with the international loans, especially the demand and the pressure it places on the dollars. And so on that one, we are in agreement. I think what she is alluding to is perhaps where I'm heading towards, which is exports, and more exports. If you look, there has been an open rumor, let me start from there, that there is intentional devaluation of our currency to increase exports. This is interesting because we are borrowing a strategy that the Chinese put to use very efficiently. And even, I think, the Japanese at some point. Now, there are two missing ingredients, and she's pointed to one of them. The first one is that these people had huge reserves of the dollar.
Already?
Yes. So that at any given time, should they feel like we are losing control of the currency or this thing is not working as we want it to, they show back their currency by just using the dollar. And they remain in control at any given time. We are not there. We are not even in terms of a comfortable margin beyond the bare minimum of 3 months, to the point where we can now say, in case things go south with the currency as it is, then we can show up the shilling, as should be the case. The second problem we have is that we are out to promote exports, yes. But which exports?
Where are they?
Because
you're not making them.
We are not even feeding ourselves, leave alone even many things. Are we even able to feed ourselves as a country? Are we able to, for example, make earbuds in the country, matchbox in the country? And that brings us now to the whole question of, I saw a very nice and elaborate work plan laid out by the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization about how they want to promote exports. It was beautiful done. The graphics were awesome. But now it was only on the marketing side. There was hardly any strategy, any thought, any work plan in terms of how do we promote cottage industries, local industries, in a way then that we can, for example, now think, how do we market what we have?
Can I ask, what were they marketing?
No, they were marketing Kenyan products.
Which one?
It was just general, that we want to increase our exports to this level. And I think the first strategy that I saw there that looked like they wanted to promote production was to put in place industrial parks.
Ramogi, let me just...
But you see...
just hold that thought for a second. Just hold it. Don't move away from it.
Okay.
Our greatest export is human resource. Okay? Were they also marketing this? Because it is by far the most successful export that we actually have in the country.
No, I did not see anywhere.
Precise. I will now hold my thought. I'll continue with it. Please say what you're saying.
Yeah, I wanted to say investment in industrial parks is not equivalent to promoting exports. Those are
It's a beginning.
yeah.
Wow.
See,
We just collect.
let me show you. If we create industrial parks like we have done, and we promote them, and then we send Moses Kuria to the Middle East, and he attracts FDI, those people come and invest here. So where is manufacturing going to be now?
Here.
It's going to be here. So what are we going to be exporting? We have products to export. See? So think long term. Long game, bana. Don't just...
If only
what?
If only our actions mirrored a fraction,
even a fraction.
of what we say. Just a fraction.
little bit.
But it's there. As we speak, Moses Kuria, Chirchir and others, and Kipchumba, and I think the president is, if he's not there, he'll be going. He's there to promote bringing those industries here and saying, look, you can come and set up. We have special economic zone. How many do you have in Mombasa alone? 2. How many do you have in Kilifi? We have. How many do we have in? We have. How many do we have in Makueni? We have. We have in Machakos, we have in Nakuru County, we have in
I think what
special
Ramogi is
economic
saying
zones.
is-
Come and invest, and we have a favorable economic environment where you can
what
invest.
Ramogi
We
is
have cheap
saying
labor that we
is
are going to export to your SCZ.
You would have even gone with one of those things that those industrial parks that you're talking about is actually making today.
They're not making. We have the industrial park.
the
We have
park itself.
We have Dongo Kundu. We want you to come and set up industry here.
Which industry?
We will facilitate you. Whatever you are producing,
Whatever
we'll
it is, come and
facilitate
do it
you.
here.
Come
No,
and set up
I think
here.
one thing I agree with Eric on is this one. It is a beginning.
Oh God, you don't realize that Eric was being sarcastic.
I am not. I'm very serious.
I don't know. He's a polite guy to the government. He cannot be
Beginning-
that sarcastic to Moses Kuria.
wow,
This one.
okay.
What is
It's a beginning.
Okay, what is it the beginning of?
It is a beginning of, for example,
Industrialization
thought
of
process
the
in terms
country.
of industrialization. And what he is saying, and I appreciate that, is that it creates an one-stop shop for example, a foreign investor to come and set up base.
Okay.
Now, with that said, we want to democratize the productive economy of this country, which means then that it is not so much about waiting with bated breath for the external investor to come and set up base. It is about how do we encourage this young person in Korogosho, for example, to produce earbuds,
Yes.
or to produce matchboxes.
Yes.
You know, how do we then come up
You've
with
left out toothpicks.
and toothpicks? How do we empower this person in terms of policy, in terms of access to credit and access to capital, in terms of marketing, in terms of training? And I think that is the conversation that was missing. It was the missing link in this plan by the Ministry of Trade. And that's what made me feel uncomfortable, that this thing is more about marketing, but it leaves out the whole lot of production. And in terms of that policy as well, we need to think about taxes, because our tax policy is just out of control in terms... I run a small business, for example, and I am so taxed that I am forced every now and then to face the reality of losses.
Yep.
Because the government takes almost half of what we make. And so the same problem, assuming I was a manufacturer, would be more compounded, because manufacturers need more capital than services.
Iko hustler fund ya kusupport SME unasema ambayo itafanya huyo
Now you're being sarcastic.
ajenge toothpicks. Let's take a break.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues with ODHIAMBO Ramogi, economist, in the studio. Ramogi, you've said there's this rumor that's been going around, and yeah, I mean, we all hear the rumor that maybe two things. One, maybe this is a deliberate release of the shilling to be to face the vagaries so that then we can earn more from the little exports that we are having. Okay. The other one has been, maybe this is actually finally the shilling going to where it should have gone last year, but one, that this situation has just been managed for so long. This is actually where the shilling should have been anyway, because of the prevailing circumstances and economic situation.
Eric, can I add something to what you're saying?
Add.
If you were to take that thinking and that logic to its eventual conclusion, could we then say that this status that we supposedly have of a middle income, what is it again?
Middle income country.
Country. That whatever configuration and whatever economic maths we performed to take us to that level was false to begin with. Because how can we be in that position that we claim to be in, and yet everything about us tells us that we're a poor, third world, banana republic, struggling? How do you marry the two?
Well, for the record and for avoidance of doubt, we are not poor. We are just poorly managed.
We are not a banana. We are a republic.
Not a banana.
Yeah, so we are not poor.
We are not.
No, we are not. A GDP of over 10 trillion, really. I mean, we are even the richest in the region if you are comparing yourself bananas to oranges. But we are not poor. What we are is poorly managed. Because the little you have then is being extracted by a few. Because there is the political angle of it and I was trying to avoid politics as much as I could, that a few people, the people who import, actually very senior politicians, the people who avoid investing and waiting until maize grows and maybe expose that maize to the risks of diseases. The politicians don't have that patience. They come into power, they say duty-free importation of maize.
They import.
And they import.
They make a couple of billions.
And they're okay. Window. And so those billions going into their pockets are actually supposed to be for Kenyans. So we are not poor. We are just poorly managed.
Do you know why we're a banana republic, sir?
Wow.
Republics that are not associated with that particular fruit have order. When people talk about ensuring that the economy grows, they actually grow the economy. The things that are said are done, or you see a semblance of it. When it is just said and the complete opposite happens, this thing you're saying, governance, my friend, that is the clearest indication that we are poor. Because if you can't realize your potential, what are you? You are always a country with potential, but where is it? And then we are comparing ourselves with our poorer cousins who are our neighbors. How on earth can that be a good comparison?
Yeah, it's a good comparison because at least it tells you where you are.
No, but if you ask me, it stunts you. It stunts you completely because all the time, rather than you striving for that thing which you ought to do, you keep saying, well, at least I'm better than this person who is not down in the ground. I mean, come on. It cannot be the benchmark for which you use to progress.
It is far away from benchmarking. It's just a comparison. But let me respond to the whole issue of, does the fact that we have poor governance allude to the fact that we are poor? No. You see, if, for example, and allow me to use a crude example of children whose father died but left wealth, and then a trustee comes and mismanages that does not mean that those children are poor.
Actually,
it's just that...
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. No. if you can't access what was left for you, what are you? You're poor.
You're wealthy.
No, you're not.
But you're just not accessing
No.
it.
Well,
Thank you. And at some point, you
will
probably
access it.
be able to access it. And
Ramogi,
the problem is governance.
Ramogi.
The problem is the trustee.
Yes, the problem is the trustees. Let's sort that issue with a trustee as opposed to beating ourselves.
Okay, if we go with your argument, Ramogi, and
Yes.
say that the problem is the trustee, how do you have an everlasting situation of poor trustee management, as in all the time your trustee is in a poor state? So what are you? You have the potential to be better forever?
You see, I think what you're saying...
I'm just a humble economist.
What you're saying, Ndu, is basically addressing what you raised earlier.
Yes.
That thinking stunts you. You are wealthy. just that you have a poor trustee managing your wealth.
It's like the dog who
First,
looks in the
accept
mirror and
if
puts
you-
a mop on his head and says, I'm a lion.
No, if you accept that you are wealthy and it's a
just a
trustee who is the
lion,
problem, then you're dealing with the issue. If you sit back and say, but me, I'm poor.
Yes.
You are giving the trustee all the leeway to actually continue eating the wealth and looking back at you and you see, we are poor.
In this case, I'm encouraging the trustee just do what they're supposed to do.
Don't encourage the trustee, fire the trustee.
Eric, do you know what puts spade to your argument? Is that these people whom we're referring to as poor don't have that mindset. Our biggest export is not government controlled. It's called labor. It's called human resource. And it's profitable because it is our hugest foreign exchange earner. What then happens at foreign exchange when they bring it, when it's brought back home? So it isn't as though the so-called Mwananchi doesn't understand. They've understood. And they're doing something about it. But now, when it comes to all this lovely talk about wanting to be an export centered country, focused country, we have simple pockets of industry in this country that not only are profitable, but have been there for the longest time. Like, say, the edible oil industry, for example. All right? At 60% production, they're able to meet the needs of the country. Countries that we keep referring to, the reason why they are where they are is their government has direct support for those industries, and they even given favorable conditions against would-be imports. Ours is the complete opposite. The imports are given priority over our own local industries. When I say the government seems to be working against, yes. So does it not, you look at what is said, what is happening, what is being done, does it not point to that?
Let me say this with all humility. Okay. I fear there is a big difference between the Ruto politicians and the Ruto economists. I am able to read and interpret what the economists are trying to do. What the politicians are trying to do, however, is just out there.
And kindly tell us what the economists are trying to do and the vehicle through which they're going to make this happen. Unfortunately,
the vehicle the politician has.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So what are the economists trying to do that we hope and knock on wood and pray that it will actually come to fruition?
The economists drafted the manifesto that focused on agriculture and MSMEs. The economists want production to be pushed up and investment, significant investment in the two sectors. The economists want us to encourage exports, whether by allowing the shilling to free fall or by in fact devaluing it intentionally. The intention is noble. Let's encourage exports. The economists are saying, all right, let's have some money to support young people to do business. He said, hustler fund. The politicians implementing the ideas that the economists have are doing it all wrong. For example, that money, if we took 50 billion and we called 10 banks into one room and we told them, we have 50 billion, you guys are in this lending business, and we want you to lend out 150 billion. Because the guarantee system works in that you can guarantee up to around a third of the whole amount. Do you know 150 billion shillings in this economy, just circulating, you and someone else are able to access this money to do small business, would make a huge difference, as opposed to 50 billion focusing mostly on the consumptive economy and not the productive economy. And so the implementation framework is very different. The politicians are importing, instead of, by practice, you lower taxes when inflation is high. You lower taxes so that you manage those prices and you make sure that people are able to access these things affordably. Now, instead of lowering the taxes that are good for everybody, like, for example, VAT, some people just said, let's import duty-free items.
And then it will be cheaper in the
market.
And
then it will be cheaper in the market. And so a few importers took advantage of what was actually meant for the general public. And so there's a big difference between the Ruto economists and the Ruto politicians. And I think it will cause us problems in the long run. And let's hope that His Excellency will recognize that.
What would it take to actually stabilize the shilling? because it's on a free fall. It is dropping like a shilling to the dollar a day.
Yeah.
What would it take to stabilize it?
No, I think I like the idea to consider butter trade, especially around fuel and some of the food items. I know it sounds very rudimentary. It feels like we are back in the 18th century. But it has been tried. Russia has tried it. Several other countries are now doing business with them in terms of barter trade. Donald Trump pushed the known world as it is today into attempting barter trade. And so that is a right direction. But we need to do more in terms of lowering the demand of the shilling. I think we need to go back to some of those lenders and tell them, look, gentlemen, we need a bit more time just to review some of
restructure our loans.
Yes, I think that would help us to manage the demand on the shilling. But at the same time, these are short-term solutions. The longer-term solutions is we need production, we need exports, we need more tourism, we need dollars. And we are not going to do that by, for example, chasing out investors like some people are trying to do in the country. We need to invest in agriculture, we need to invest in MSMEs, we need to have policies that encourage manufacturing, we need to lower the cost of energy so that then there can be production. And this government just needs to work.
Ramogi, as we're heading towards this new millennium, very many World Bank and other international financial bodies looked at Kenya in the Moi era, and they even predicted its collapse, simply because the maths didn't add up. Debt to GDP, all these things. And yet, the strangest thing about that era, strangest was this.
We're self-reliant.
Yes, you understood it perfectly. We were a net exporter to the region. In that very period, we were a net exporter. You needed to travel out of this country to go to play and you'd find something which is manufactured in Kenya. But something else. There's something that they refer to as the hidden economy, what we call the Juakali industry, what we now call SMEs. It was an economy that was already strong then. It was vibrant. To move to the next level, where it wasn't just an SME, it was a medium size and to a bigger one, simply required mechanisms which we even had in place. We had ICDC, which just somehow went south, continued going south, and went south completely. Okay? We had Kenya Industrial Estates, which again, for agriculture, we had the Agricultural Finance Corporation. We had the mechanisms to ensure that the very thing you're saying now enabled people who worked and functioned in that part of the economy, the financial muscle to grow. Now, if established structures were watered down to the point where they became non-existent, in the books they exist, but one cannot see what it is that they are doing, it meant that that level, that aspect of our economy was left to struggle on their own, and they have continued to do so. There is a lot of talk about SMEs and the growth thereof, but if you look at the economy and what it is that sector represents, if that sector was grown, we'd have an economic revolution in the country. It's not complicated.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. In those days, we became self-reliant. Juakali industry goes as back early as even the 70s, and it has established itself over time. We have come up with structures. Of course, the bad governance of the Moi administration destroyed these structures and made them to be in the books, as you put. Today, I want to believe that we have a new constitution and that the governance of our country has at least made some significant steps so that we are not where we were in the Moi administration. But I also want to say the fact that the bigger contribution of the Kibaki administration was to avail credit, because you had containers that did not have credit. I mean, you have container without water, it's useless. So you have structures that and industries, but did not have money that is circulating and creating a multiplier effect. And so the biggest contributor of the Kibaki administration was credit. What Kibaki did is he got some very cheap loans from the international community and grants, and then avoided borrowing from banks. And the banks had now to come and beg the likes of CT Muga, please borrow from us, because they had a lot of money. And then the central bank at that time reduced the interest rate significantly so that you could access credit easily. That pushed the economy to a climax of 7% growth in the year 2007. And today, where we are, today, the biggest problem is access to credit. There is no money circulating in the economy. And you see, we had even started this conversation with when the government spends, that money is supposed to create activity and thereby GDP. But you see, the government spends and all this money goes to contractors somewhere in China. And so even vegetables these guys buy and bring into the country because they bring their raw materials here and they bring their materials here and everything. And even their workers, they come. And so you have an expenditure budget of 3 trillion and a third of it is somewhere in a bank in China. And I think that is the bigger problem. We need that money to circulate locally.
I couldn't agree with you more.
How do we do that?
Not just
You see, because
yes, go ahead.
and there's something that you said. You said, the economists are thinking the way you are thinking, but the politicians are not thinking the way the economists are thinking. Really?
What do you mean, really? It's my observation
Really?
that the ideas are noble. And these gentlemen sit in a press conference. Man, some of the ideas they churn out of there. And then you hear 2 days later what they do. Those ideas are put on the shelf. They were just good for the press conference.
But
so that's my observation.
Do you hear the same economists coming to say, no, this is not what we wanted?
Eric, even if it was me,
Do you hear,
at State House.
from your own, because you hobnob with these fellow economists, do you hear them telling you, what the... is there growing frustration?
I will neither affirm nor disaffirm. But the fact of the matter is that the ideas are very different from the implementation. And that is going to be a problem.
Going to be.
Yes.
It is a problem, sir.
At least
It can only get worse, but it is already a problem.
Yeah. Because some of the things that these guys had actually set out to do and they are being implemented, yes, but in a very self-interest way. And that's the biggest problem of hiring politicians across board in cabinet. If you ask me, the Foreign Office should have had a bureaucrat. The Trade Office should have had a bureaucrat. Having politicians in some of these places is just too sensitive.
We experimented with that.
Look where it took us.
Yes, we experimented with that, and the results were disastrous.
Some of those who are in those offices are now in the advisory board.
Yes, we've experimented with this, putting bureaucrats in these positions, which are essentially political. Let's get back to the brass tacks. This particular government is talking about reversing some of the not so positive aspects of the Ndegwa Commission, which essentially legalized a conflict of interest. They allowed office holders and account holders to actually participate in business. Now, how crazy can anything get? Can it get any crazier?
Yes, the Ndegwa Commission, legally speaking, they were accurate. That you are at liberty to do whatever you want to do.
Really?
Wherever you want.
Wherever you want. It's a willing buyer, willing seller. We've had that statement. But in terms of general practice, in terms of just making our country to move forward, they were wrong. And I pray that this administration thinks about reversing that decision. I, however, don't expect my prayers to be answered in the immediate.
One of the things, though, that I often find puzzling is this attempt or this wish and this action of people wanting to be exceedingly wealthy, obnoxiously wealthy overnight. And some of them are people who, on the face of it, are fairly intelligent. How does it not occur to them that these very things, activities they want to be involved in, that if the economy grew and was bigger, there'd be a lot more for them to plunder. How can they not understand this
They
simple
can see,
concept?
but they can also see time. Okay.
I need to do this thing
Wait, you're saying it's your economy
now. We
growing.
wait for it to grow,
boss.
we water it, it fruits, we pluck. No.
In the
And
meantime,
by the time, for example, it's grown, it's someone else in office.
yeah. Yes, now, bana. Now, anyway, thank you very much, Ramogi, for joining us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you. Come again soon.